copied Lefroyg's idea, need more than 8 words. Hello Whisky fans, today I'm going to be looking at something very exciting. It's the new Ardbeg committee release. This was released back in 2021 for anyone that's watching this in the future. And if you are watching this in the future, how is it in the future? Is it safe to go outside yet? Anyway, Ardbeg 8yo, this is the new committee release. It is bottled at 50.8%. It is non-chill filtered. It doesn't say either way if it's natural colour, but Ardbeg is probably the distillery that's consistently bottled some of the palest and also most delicious whiskies that we've ever seen. So a company that a few years ago was releasing their 10-year-old that was nearly the same colour as water. I really doubt that Ardbeg as a company would add colouring to their whiskey, and obviously it is 8 years old, has got an age statement. So even though they don't fully explicitly state that this is an integrity bottling, I believe it probably is. And yes, this is Ardbeg guaranteed 8 years old for discussion. So the whole idea behind this is that Ardbeg have done something a little bit differently, and if you have a look on their website, you'll see some details and background about this being the flagship standard expression from Ardbeg in an alternate universe. So a universe where the Ardbeg 10 is not their standard expression, it's not everyone's favourite smoky Islay whiskey, it's probably mine. But we're talking about a universe where Ardbeg as standard is bottled at 8 years old, and also, if you do a little bit of digging, you'll see that this is an ex-sherry matured whiskey. Now, it doesn't say what proportion of the casks that go into this are ex-sherry, but there are some in there. And as I alluded to in the intro, I do feel like they have been a little bit naughty and stolen Lefroyg's idea. A few years ago now, I think it is 2014, Lefroy ran the Opinions Welcome campaign, where they got all of the Lefroy fans to come up with short little marketing slogans to promote their whiskey. And if they liked what you wrote, then they put it on their website and in their adverts, basically getting the customers to do the marketing department's job. And I don't really like that, but if we're honest, Ardbeg whiskey, with its completely rabidly fanatical, enthusiastic fan base, buying everything that they put out and preaching to the entire world how great Ardbeg is, because it is, it's kind of what Ardbeg fans have always done, isn't it? We are the Ardbeg marketing machine. Something that I do find interesting about this one, though, is that unlike most Ardbeg committee releases, they have said that this first batch that was put on sale sold out extremely quickly, as all Ardbeg committee releases do, but they have said that there will be more of this. It's a committee release, but it's also more of a widely available release. I'm not sure why, but it's also available in a limited list of countries. And I don't know if that's why it's going to be released in more than one batch and be more available. I don't know if that's how they've made it more available. But I am really happy about the fact that they're making this available to more people, because that's one of the criticisms that I've had over the years really about Ardbeg, that the committee releases, the fan base is so rabid that everything just sells out instantly, and if you're not lucky and you're not able to be on the website at the specific minute of release, you miss out and you have to pay 10 times the price at auction, which I'm never going to do, and you shouldn't either. So the fact that they're saying that more people will be able to get their hands on this, and you might be able to get a second bottle at some point, is brilliant. I really like that. Well done, Ardbeg. One concern about this whiskey, though, is this talk of an alternate timeline where the standard Ardbeg is 8 years old rather than 10 years old. Is that Ardbeg preparing us for a drop in the age statement in their flagship standard bottling? Them trying to get everyone's opinions, the hardcore fans' opinions on an 8-year-old as opposed to a 10-year-old, is that kind of like them getting approval to drop the age statement? And should you be worried about that? In my opinion, yes. you probably should be worried about that, because whenever a distillery talks about moving away from integrity bottlings, whether that's getting rid of age statements, or whether it's starting to chill filter or add colouring or drop the ABVs, it's always worrying. You would think that Ardbeg is a distillery that we can trust. They really are quality and integrity through and through, to the point where you would think that Ardbeg would never do that to us. But there were a lot of people saying that about Glendronach, and look what they've done to us recently. Anyway, that's enough doom and gloom, because we have got an Ardbeg committee release with us here. So let's not worry about all of that too much. Let's get it in the glass and see what we've got. One thing that I do love about all Ardbeg releases, I think with the exception of Blasda, which was in a clear glass bottle, I think almost all Ardbeg releases come in a dark glass bottle, dark green bottle. And I think that's amazing. I think that all distilleries should do it, because if you put the whiskey on the shelf and it's in dark glass, you can't see what colour it is, and that means there's no excuse for anyone to be looking at the colour of the whiskey and using that to influence whether they think it's old or whether they think it's sherried. It just takes away the temptation and the need for the producer to add colouring. And to be honest, I just think it looks really good. Nice dark green glass, it just looks really traditional, really nice, doesn't it? So let's get some in my clear glass, see how it noses and tastes. So the colour of this one, bearing in mind that they have said that there is some ex-sherry gone into this, it's still pretty pale. So I'd say that almost certainly natural colour. So after reviewing the Ardbeg Wee Beastie 5-year-old recently, so that was another lower age statement than 10-year-old at 5 years, but also an Ardbeg that had a sherry treatment to it. So in a way, you would think that this should be between Ardbeg Wee Beastie and the Ardbeg 10-year-old. And immediately when I nose this one, I am glad that there is quite a lot of peat left on the nose of this one. With the Ardbeg Wee Beastie, I think the sherry treatment just took a little bit too much out of it. It's still a really good Ardbeg, and it's an Ardbeg that for the price I think is well worth buying, but it was definitely less peaty than the 10-year-old, but this one is definitely more like the 10-year-old in its phenolic quality. Yeah, getting lots of dry, ashy, burnt phenolic peatiness to the nose on this one. Some really nice spirity notes to this one too. It's a really well balanced whiskey, getting a strong spirity lime note, and there's a little bit of an oranginess to the nose on this one. There's also quite a mineral quality to this whiskey. There's probably more of a salty brininess than you get on the average Ardbeg, and also a rather mineral, slightly chalky, gravelly quality. I don't know if it's because I'm thinking about the Ardbeg Scotch release that they came out with recently, but I'm also getting quite a bit of charcoal on the nose of this one. Quite a dry, charcoaly, burnt charcoal barbecue sort of aroma. I would say that there's also more than the average amount of maltiness on the nose of this Ardbeg too. Sort of a sweet vanilla malt. And in my experience from having this whiskey for a few days, I would say that the sweet maltiness on the nose of this Ardbeg 8-year-old, it really grows massively over time. If you leave this whiskey in the glass for a little while, maybe put a lid over it if you're going to leave it long term, that maltiness really grows and is really nice. It's really a sign of quality, in my opinion, when you can really smell and taste the barley in a whiskey. And I think the reason it grows so much in this whiskey is that phenolic peatiness, that burnt, ashy peat quality to the whiskey, does die off if you leave the whiskey in a glass for a while, and that's really replaced by that maltiness that's obviously there all along, but really revealed after a few minutes. There's also quite a sweet breadiness to the nose of this Ardbeg. Like a sweet, buttery brioche quality. definitely sweet and buttery. It's obviously in the background because this Ardbeg, as with a lot of Ardbegs, it's all about those smoky, dry, ashy peatiness. But if you really give this whisky some time, there's definitely a lot of different dimensions to this, and we've only got halfway through the nose so far. Also getting a little bit of menthol on this one, and I think that those minty, menthol, really fresh, aggressive notes on a peated whisky, something that you quite often get in an Ardbeg, and I think that it really accentuates the medicinal qualities to a whisky. Also getting some tarry notes, and those tarry notes go really well with that brininess, give you a real maritime character to this whisky. And mixed in with that tarriness, there's quite a acrid, plasticky note, and that sounds odd to anyone that's not a fan of their heavily peated whiskies, but anyone that knows what I mean, they're going to instantly know what I'm talking about and know that that's something really lovely in a heavily peated Islay Scotch. This last tasting note on the nose, I was in two minds to whether to mention it or not, but there is a slightly oily, fatty, immature note on the nose of this one, and I think that's mainly because I'm comparing it in my mind all the time to the Ardbeg 10-year-old, which doesn't have any hint of immaturity at all. But on this one, it doesn't spoil it at all, but I do have to say that it is noticeably slightly less mature than the 10-year-old. Let's see how it tastes. That is a fantastic whisky. The strange thing is, I've probably just spent 5 minutes just describing how this whisky smells, and as soon as I taste it, I immediately want to say it tastes better than it smells. On the palate, immediately the first thing you get on the arrival is some really strong notes of dry, burnt, peated grist. There's also quite a bit of sweetness, but it's not a sweetness that covers up the peatiness and the medicinal qualities. The sweetness on this, it's quite a vanilla bourbon sweetness, the sort of thing that you would recognise from a Lafroig, and I don't normally recognise that level of vanilla bourbon sweetness in an Ardbeg, but it's definitely there in this one. Also getting some sweet lemon, some of that trademark Ardbeg sweet pear that you get from coming through from the spirit, some mild milk chocolatiness, a little bit of cocoa, some more of that barrel char. So on the nose I mentioned that I was getting some charcoaly notes, and I think there's definitely some more of that on the palate of this whisky. I do wonder if they've used some of their heavily charred alligator casks in the vatting of this one. And there's also, just on the tail end of the palate, I'm getting a little hint of clove, which just ties in beautifully with the overall medicinal qualities of this whisky. I'm going to have one more sip, just to look at the finish. So I would say that it's a long finish, it's a really nice finish, with lots of peppery burnt peat, a little bit of chocolate again on the late palate on the finish, and chocolatey maltiness. And I really like that about this Ardbeg, that I don't know if it's the sherry cask bringing it out, but I think that there's a little bit more maltiness on this Ardbeg than you get on the 10-year-old, and I really like it. So, as for a grade for the Ardbeg 8-year-old committee release for discussion, because discussion is what we do here, discussion about malt, I think I'm going to give this one, and I'm really surprising myself here, I'm going to give it a B+, and that surprises me because that's the same grade as I gave to the Ardbeg 10-year-old. Now, at 8 years old, even though they have upped the ABV a little bit, I didn't expect to like this one as much as the 10, especially when I heard that there was some ex-sherry wood gone into the vatting on this one. But I really don't think that there's that much evidence of the sherry that's gone into this. I would be really surprised, and I might be wrong, but I'd be really surprised if there's much of a high percentage of sherry wood gone into this one, and I'd be absolutely astounded if they said that they'd put a high percentage of fresh, really active sherry casks into this whisky. It really is much less sherried, much less sherried than Ugadal, and it's much less sherried than the Wee Beastie, and it's a lot more peaty and phenolic than the Wee Beastie. I think the only real evidence of sherry wood that I'm getting on this one is that little bit of chocolatiness on the palate and the finish, and maybe just an overall sweetness that isn't what you would get from a bourbon cask or the malt. I would actually say that this Ardbeg 8-year-old, even with the sherry treatment, it's almost as peaty as the 10-year-old. And I hate myself a little bit for saying this, but it's basically as good as the 10-year-old, which I really didn't expect. I think the only criticism that I can come up with for this whiskey is that, possibly due to the sherry treatment, it is a little bit simpler, and that's mainly just on the finish. But for anyone tasting this, and especially with regards to my earlier comment of, is this trying to get approval from the hardcore Ardbeg fans to drop the age statement lower, I would say when you're tasting this, even though I think that this is pretty much on par with the Ardbeg 10-year-old, would it be on par with the 10-year-old if you release this in huge quantities, multiple vattings per year, vattings that aren't cherry-picked? If it was a general release on the same level as the 10-year-old, would it be as consistently as high quality? I'm not sure about that. I must say that I do really like this whiskey, and to be honest, I wouldn't mind at all if this whiskey replaced either the Ugadal or the Wee Beastie. I would be fine with that. But Ardbeg, if you are watching this, and with regards to your alternate timelines where this replaces the 10-year-old, what I have to say is I love this whiskey, but hands off our age statements. Thanks for watching, and cheers.